Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of the William Bonney Weekly Podcast. And today we are looking at, as I seem to say almost every week when we look at a prison, one of the most notorious in the UK. We're looking at HMP Wormwood Scrubs in the west of London, another massive castle-like Victorian prison satisfying the west of London. A lot of people from the West End getting into crime would have been there. It's a local prison. And category C/B means that it's going to hold some of the more naughty criminals, but also, a lot of just ordinary bods as well. So it seems that, in the 1800s, the Victorians really tried to make a stamp on crime, and they built a lot of prisons. So in your local city or your local area, your remand prison that you go to is an ancient Victorian prison. Massive. The idea is to kind of get you under the boot right from the beginning. So it was all about punishment, high walls, big buildings, lots of landings, little windows that are up high, that sort of thing. They're almost like portholes in your cell. They're all built as single cells to start with, but they always end up being double cells because obviously we needed to double capacity in the prisons as time's gone on. We haven't built very many prisons. It's very difficult to build prisons. There are some out there. But not enough new modern prisons. But anyway, we digress. Today I want to talk about Wormwood Scrubs and just doing some of the research on it. It's actually a really, really interesting place. So yeah, let's delve a little deeper and have a look at our prison today. So Wormwood Scrubs has held some of the biggest celebrities in the country as well, other than sort of notorious criminals. We've had EastEnders stars in there. We've had rock and rollers. And just, it seems like as well as all your little Billy burglars and your muggers and your wrong-uns and everything else, Wormwood Scrubs was used to house high-profile celebrity criminals as well. And the one that I'm thinking of at the minute, first of all, is Baby Shambles, the guy Pete Doherty. I always used to like him. He's a bit of a smackhead, but he's some of them are quite personable. I've read his book. He's a funny little guy. He only used to do gigs in London because that was where he would get his heroin from. And then he found out from someone that if you just go to any town in the UK and just ask a homeless person where to find heroin, then you can find it. As soon as he learned that, then Baby Shambles, or it wasn't Baby Shambles then, they had another band, the Libertines. But they just went on tour then because they realised they could get heroin other than London. So suddenly Pete Doherty was interested in travelling out of town. But yeah, no, it is interesting. He's obviously not a serious crook, got found with drugs and things. Or did he punch a photographer? I can't remember now. I should look, but I haven't. Now, a much more notable prisoner that went in there, and a much bigger rock and roller, was Keith Richards. He ended up in there, as everyone does, got found on the wrong side of the law. He's not a criminal, not a crook in the biggest sense of the word. But he found himself on the wrong side of the law. He had a party in his mansion in Surrey, and there were some narcotics flying around. And it was the News of the World snitched on him. The News of the World found out there was a drug-fueled party going on down at Keith Richards' mansion, so they snitched on him. And the police came down, and Keith Richards saw them because they'd been taking LSD. He saw them through the window, and he thought they were fans trying to sneak in or trying to find trying to get a picture or something like that. Went to the door, found out there's a ton of police outside waiting to do a raid. The police found a little bit of cannabis, some other small amounts of other drugs. But you have to remember that their band at the time, the Rolling Stones, were not hated, but they were the bad boys of rock and roll. At the time, if you can imagine it. They were punished. Mick Jagger was sent to one prison for a couple of months, and Keith Richards was sent to Wormwood Scrubs for a year, just for the small amount of drugs they found. And the feeling is that they were sent there to be taught a lesson, and they hoped that being posh little, band members, rich little boys, that they wouldn't be able to survive in jail and that they would possibly get raped and beaten up and all the rest of it. But Keith Richards is from a humble background, and he's fairly tough. He's anti-establishment, so there's probably a few others in there that took him under his wing. Just from my own personal experience, if any celebrity going into jail is going to be put under a spotlight, now if you just fit in, if you think you're better than everyone else, then you're going to have problems, because you're going to start butting heads with people who've got nothing to lose, and people who've been in the system since they were 10, 11. They do not care about punching a celebrity in the mouth. But if you go in there a little bit more humble, just a little bit more personable, make a joke about where you are, fit in, try and hang out with the lads, then you'll get on fine. You'll get on absolutely fine. If you've got a few stories to tell, to kind of break the mood, maybe sing a little song, you'll be fine. But that's what the scrubs was used for in the 60s and 70s and things, to hold just your average normal bods. But if you go way back, it's always been a notorious prison, and it's got a really, really interesting history. So let's have a look at a little bit of where Wormwood Scrubs started. So let's start with the name Wormwood Scrubs. Sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? It comes from, it's on Duquesne Road. Now, Duquesne was the person who was, in the Victorian times, in charge of prisons. So Duquesne designed Wormwood Scrubs, and Wormwood Scrubs was supposed to be the jewel in the crown of all the Victorian prisons. That's why you've got those big gates. The gates look like a castle. It's an old throwback to an old castle almost. It looks fortified. It looks massive. And yeah, Duquesne basically built the prison as this was supposed to be the forefront of the the prison establishment for the Victorians, and this wanted to be a blueprint of how to deal with crime and crooks and criminals. So it was hard. You went in there on solitary. So when you went into the prison, first of all, you went into solitary confinement for a month, and after that time of hard, obviously there's no toilets, it's slop out. You're probably eating mush that's slid under the door, that sort of stuff. And it's pretty awful. So no matter who you are, where you come from, you're going on solitary confinement for the first month. And then if you haven't broken any rules, you then move up through the ranking into, better situation, better jobs, better everything else. But they wouldn't give you the rules when you first went into the prison. So quite often you would find yourself breaking rules that you didn't even know existed. So can you imagine you didn't know what time to get up? So you're constantly being accused of sleeping in. You didn't know you're now not allowed to lay on your bed during the day. You're not allowed to, maybe you've got to have a jacket on when you come out of the cell, that sort of thing. These are rules you've got no idea of, but you get pulled up for breaking them, and you probably got a lot more time in solitary as well. The prison lies at the southern end of the ancient park by the same name. So Scrubs refers to the scrubland, while Wormwood is a grey foliaged shrub common to wasteland. So basically it's just named after the patch of wasteland that it was built on. In the initial steps in the winter of 1874 involved the construction of a small prison made of corrugated iron, and a temporary shed served as barracks for a number of the wardens. 9 specifically picked prisoners, all within a year of release, completed the building of the prison, after which 50 more prisoners were brought in to erect a second temporary prison wing. Building then began on the permanent prison, with bricks and mortar being manufactured on the site. So isn't that interesting? They literally built everything. They built the bricks. They made the bricks in the jail, and then prisoners built the prison with their bare hands. By the summer of 1875, enough bricks had been prepared to build the prison's first block, and its ground floor was finished as winter began. So that was good, wasn't it? Get the building done just as you got to go inside. Construction was completed in 1891. So started in 1875, completed in 1891. And the designer was, as we mentioned, Sir Edmund Frederick Duquesne, who gave his name to the prison's road. I wonder if he picked that. That's a bit of a bold move, isn't it? What are we going to call the road? We're going to call it Canal Street. Are we going to call it Chapel Road? Let's call it Duquesne Street. The prison held during the First World War, the prison held a number of conscientious objectors to the First World War, one of whom, the Quaker journalist Hubert Peat, wrote about his conditions in a book called 112 Days Hard Labour, published in 1917. Now, this was part of the prison reform This was basically, it was people in the middle classes being sent to prison. So conscientious objectors, people who found themselves on the wrong side of the law, not being a working class scumbag like myself, being sent to prison. We kind of got what we asked for. But middle class people seemed better than prison. And when they went in there, they realised how hard it was. And it was these middle classes that then fought for the reform of the prison, because they didn't realise how bad it was. And it was only when middle class voices started saying about how bad prisons were that that things started actually to change, and routines changed, and it brought about prison reform across the country. So it is really, really interesting as they moved away from working class scumbags and started jailing middle class scumbags. That actually change in these Victorian prisons actually happened. Jumping forward 100 years, in 1979, IRA prisoners staged a rooftop protest over visiting rights. 60 inmates and several prison officers were injured. In 1982, an inquiry blamed much of the difficulties on a failing prison management. Governor John McCarthy had quit before the rioting. In a letter to the Sunday Times, he had described Wormwood Scrubs as a penal dustbin. I don't know. It's pretty accurate, I would imagine. Most prisons are fairly awful, and it's there's a lot of stuff that goes on in prisons that you wouldn't find on the outside. But because it's prison, you can just basically say, well, if you don't like it, you shouldn't have committed crime. In the 1990s, a police investigation into allegations of staff brutality resulted in the suspension of 27 prison officers and the conviction of 6 for assault, though 3 later won appeals against conviction. The prison service paid out more than £3 million in out-of-court settlements with ex-prisoners who had alleged brutality. The chief inspector of prisons delivered a damning report. They always do, didn't they? It's always a damning report. They delivered a damning report on the conditions in which the prison was told to improve or close. You will soon become a Weatherspoons. Weatherspoon Scrubs. In March 2004, a further report from the chief inspector stated that Wormwood Scrubs had greatly improved after making fundamental changes. 3/4 of the inmates at the prison had said that the staff treated them with respect, which was better than the national average. Oh, I suppose they're talking the national average of prisoners. I thought they were talking about the national average of the average man on the street. Okay. However, the report also stated that inmates spent far too much time in their cells, and that 36% of eligible inmates were involved in educational work. So only 1/3 of people that actually could go to the education or the work system were doing it. Now that's normally down to staff. You just haven't got the staff to come in and take people for these courses, or it could have just been that they didn't bother, and a course that could hold 10 people, possibly they only sent 3 over to do it. In November 2008, another report from the chief inspector stated that conditions at Wormwood Scrubs had deteriorated since the last inspection. Oh my God, 4 years later. You only had it for 4 years. Heightened prison gang activity had been detected, and 20% of prisoners had failed drug tests. Oh no. Now, these drug tests are really interesting. We should do a whole video about mandatory drug testing, because essentially, so once every month, is it once a month? They bring out a list of prisoners across the country who need to be taken for mandatory drug testing, which basically means that at some point during the day, 2 officers are going to come for you from the security department, and they're going to take you to a room, normally down by the legal visits, and they take the piss. They put it in a cup and they test it, and it comes back in a few days. And those obviously statistics are then driven across the country. This is how bad or good prisons are. There's a lot of concern possibly that the mandatory drug testing is only done on inmates that they know will pass, because obviously they wanted to help statistics. We were asked sometimes on the enhanced if you wanted to go and do a drug test, knowing full well that we would be negative. Once you move on to the enhanced landing, or if you're in an enhanced regime or an enhanced prison, then you have to do monthly or every 28-day drug tests anyway. And that was something that we had to do on the resettlement wing in Dartmoor. If we wanted to keep going out, because if you haven't listened to my videos, the resettlement wing at Dartmoor was basically a Category D wing within a Category C prison. So while we were down on the wing, we were able to go out to work. I used to go out from about 9 till 6 every day to work. And we also used to have visits at the weekend called town visits, which meant that they would just open the door at 9 o'clock. We would go out with our family, and we didn't have to come back till about 5 or 6 o'clock that evening, which was brilliant. Because Dartmoor is about 2 hours away from home. I used to be able to jump into a car, fly home. I'll be home in about sort of an hour and a half, have a few beers with my pals, go and see maybe a girl or two, and then whip my way back up, whip my way back up to Dartmoor for 5:30. It was great fun. It was a really good time. I forgot what we were talking about. So, yeah. Oh yeah, drug tests. So yeah, we wouldn't risk taking any sort of drugs on the whole, because we knew we'd be tested so often, and we knew what we were losing. We knew we were going back onto the main wing if we failed that drug test. And why on earth would you want to go back onto the main wing to do prison when we were doing it so easily? So in November 2008, Scrubs has deteriorated. The prison cell blocks are grade 2 listed. Fantastic. That means you can't change anything. With the gatehouse given an even greater grade 2 star rating. So when it becomes a Wetherspoons, it will have to keep those big gates, and that'll probably be where they put the toilets at the top. You always have to go up a load of stairs, don't you, for the Wetherspoons? Major structural changes to the prison's management block took place in 2013-14. Blah, blah, blah. That's not interesting. In 2017, the prison was reportedly overcrowded, with some areas were strewn with litter and infested with rats and cockroaches. They could do with prison cats. Even if they just ran around outside, you could really do with a prison cat. And I was reading something about that, about when the plagues came way back in the day, when the plagues came to London. It also coincided with the same sort of time when one of the mayors in London, he hated cats, so he thought they were witch-like. So he drove all the cats out of London, and then suddenly the rats took over, and you had the plagues. At the time of the inspection, there were 1,258 prisoners. Some were locked in their cells for 23 hours a day. The prison was reportedly dangerous for staff and inmates, and officers were concerned for their safety. There were 40 to 50 incidents a month, violent incidents a month. The chief inspector described an extremely concerning picture with intractable, an extremely concerning picture, including intractable failings, continuing since earlier inspections from 2014. In 2018, a prisoner was stabbed to death, and 3 other prisoners were charged with his murder on August 30th, the day before my birthday. 2018, prisoner Winston Augustine committed suicide in the segregation unit after spending 2 days locked in a showerless cell with no food and without the tramadol prescribed for kidney stones that caused him pain. He was suffering from ketoacidosis due to starvation. A 2021 inquest subsequently identified the prison's failure to provide food and medication as contributing factors to his death. The facility's head of safer custody told the inquest that she was horrified by the wrongdoings. Obviously, that's really, really sad. It happens. You don't know. So we're obviously looking at that inmate and going, oh my God, that sounds so bad. But what did he do? So he may have done nothing. He may have absolutely been, just wrong place, wrong time. But he possibly could have been a complete arsehole as well, spitting in people's faces, throwing piss and shit around. And, who wants to give you medication? Gallstones seem like a perfectly reasonable thing to make someone put up with if they've spat in your face. So yeah, today it's a category B prison for all adult inmates, male inmates. It has 5 wings and a number of smaller dedicated units. All accommodation includes electricity, integral sanitation. Sorry, that means it's got a toilet, a TV, and accompanying bedroom furniture. Yeah. A bit like every prison, really. I wanted to have a look at some of the inmates that have been there as well, because obviously we talked a little bit about Keith Richards. He held his own. But there were some others. There was a chap called Leslie Grantham, who I mistook for somebody else altogether. And yeah, I didn't realise that he'd been banged up for murder before he was on EastEnders. Let's just find where I had his notes. Leslie Grantham, let's have a look here. Okay, so Leslie Grantham, born 30th of April, 1947, bit of a war baby. He was an English actor, best known... He was an English actor. Is he dead now? He dead? Oh, he died in 2018. Oh, here we go. He was best known for his role as Dirty Den Watts in BBC soap opera EastEnders. He was a convicted murderer, having served 10 years for the killing of a West German taxi driver, and had significant press coverage resulting from an online sex scandal. I remember something like that. I don't want to talk about it too much in case it was bad, like involving kids or something, but I remember there being pictures of him with his knob out. Let's have a look. On December the 3rd, 1966, Grantham attempted to rob a taxi driver, Felix Rees, by threatening him at gunpoint and demanding money. In a struggle between the two men, Grantham shot Rees, who died from a gunshot wound to the head. Grantham was arrested and charged with murder. In a statement to the police following his arrest, Grantham said he did not know the gun was loaded and it had gone off during the struggle, which would have resulted in a conviction for manslaughter had a jury believed his version of events. However, at his trial in 1967, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. A bit like Lucy Letby. Although he had committed the murder in West Germany, he served his entirety of his prison sentence in British prisons. This was because soldiers and officers convicted of any criminal offence that warrants a sentence over 2 years were automatically transferred to Her Majesty's Prison Service. He was also dishonourably discharged. He was released in 1977, having served 10 years inside, while he was at Ley Hill in Gloucestershire, an open prison where my good friend escaped from. He performed in several plays for the inmates. Oh, so he's another one of these like Ashley Walters, who thinks that prison is a stage. He was encouraged to get more involved in acting professionally by the disgraced Labour politician Dan Smith, who was also an inmate at Ley Hill during the mid-70s. Grantham also met actress Louise Jameson during her visit to Ley Hill near the end of his imprisonment, and she had encouraged him to take up acting and became good friends with her. So, yeah, he was one of the more famous, to me, prisoners there. There was another very interesting chap, an American fellow called Morris Cohen. Now, at the time he got sentenced, he was an American fellow, came to the UK. He was a spy for Russia. Him and his girlfriend had became spies because of their communist beliefs. He was also known by his alias Peter Kroger. He was arrested and convicted of espionage for the Soviet Union. He basically sold out tons of spies in Russia. So UK and American spies in Russia, who then either went on to end up in prison or get killed because of the information that he basically sold to the Russians. He was given a 41-year prison sentence, which was one of the largest at the time. When was he arrested? Was it 19? Oh no, he died in 95. So he was born in 1910. So basically he then escaped. He was at Scrubs. He got someone on the outside to throw over a rope ladder. So the chap on the other side held onto the rope. He climbed up the rope ladder, jumped over the wall. But when he jumped from the wall, he broke his wrist. It's a long way up those walls. You can get over them, but can you survive the trip the other side? He, like I say, broke his wrist. He needed some hospital treatment, but obviously, Russian spy escaping from the largest prison sentence at the time. He was all over the news, and he found it very difficult to go to hospital. So he ended up going to someone who was he was a doctor, but he happened to be part of the anarchist party, very anti-establishment, hated the UK and everything it stood for. So this doctor agreed to help him, obviously, because, an enemy of the state is a friend of mine, sort of shit. Got his wrist fixed. The funny thing about that is because, again, bandages and things like that weren't as easy to come by as they are now. You can't just go down to the all-night Tesco's and go and pick them up. So one of the chap who helped him escape, one of his friends worked on Doctor Who. And on Doctor Who, they had, in the makeup department, they had a load of bandages and things that they hadn't used. So they got some of these bandages. They bandaged the chap up. They drove him out of the country, sneaked him out of the country, took him into Germany. At that point, Germany was on the east-west divide, and the guy who helped him escape, basically just dropped him off at the border, and he scuttled off back into Russia, where he died later on, like I say, in 95. He was aged 84, so, you know, he would have died in prison, but he decided that he wasn't down for that, and he escaped. I thought that was really, really interesting. But like I say, there was a number, because it's a West End jail, there were a number of people who went to jail from the middle classes, and they found that the prison routine in there was just intolerable. It was awful. So that's what sparked the change, which then led to basically sweeping reforms across the country, which changed the way and the life of prisoners everywhere. So, Wormwood Scrubs. What an interesting little place. And like I say, it was really enjoyable watching the documentaries and finding out a little bit more about the place. I thought Leslie Grantham was the guy from Blue Peter, who was shagging Alfie Titmuss. So when I clicked on it, I was a bit surprised to see Dirty Den, and I was even more surprised to see that he'd been done for murder. And then he worked as a London gangster on EastEnders. Wouldn't it have been ironic if they'd killed him off, not by shooting him by a canal, but if they'd shot him in a taxi? That would have been interesting, wouldn't it? But yes, anyway, thank you very much. Obviously, the people who make it here, make it all the way to the end of the video, you are the special ones. You are my fans, you are my friends. Come and find me on Instagram, WilliamBonnie838. When I get my shit together a bit more, I'm going to start doing some live episodes. So while I'm recording this, I will also have a Instagram live, so you can see my pretty face. We're going to do a ton more Lucy Letby videos, because it's just pumped people towards my site. Thousands of views and hundreds of subscribers from 2 videos. So, I'm just going to do a Lucy Letby channel from now on. Let me know what you think. But it's mostly just women arguing. Normally my videos are like 90% men and 10% women. But all the Lucy Letby ones, interestingly, I've gone up to like 60-70% women. And the arguments in the comments are too much to keep up with. Every time I look at my phone, there's more notifications saying that people sort of arguing with each other over whether she's innocent or not. But once the heat has died down, we'll write to her and we'll ask her. Let's see what she says. All right, thank you very much for everyone who's messaged me on Instagram. Thank you very much for everyone who shares, likes, and subscribes. I will be here again on Wednesday just to give you some more ramblings. But yeah, thank you very much for taking part today. Thank you very much for listening. Like, subscribe, tell your mum. Thank you very much. Cheers now. Bye-bye.